the customers we sell to, not all of them are in the office any more than I am. And that the decision makers' makeup and profiles are different. Knocking on someone's door, there wouldn't be someone on the other end who could actually tell you yes. So finding customers and decision makers digitally, virtually, is what we're finding to become very productive. Not to say our outside sales team's not productive. I'm just more intellectually stimulated with the opportunity around looking at a seller resource and determining how to maximize that productivity of that resource.
I'm Devin Reed.
And I'm Sheena Badani.
And you're watching Reveal, the Revenue Intelligence podcast powered by Gong.
Keep watching here to see the full interview. Or if you like to listen to podcasts on the go, check out the links in the description below.
And if you like what you hear, subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify, or all of them. Why not? And while you're there, make sure to leave us a 5-star review. We personally read every single one, and I think I speak for both of us when I say they mean the world to us.
Could not agree more, Devin. Now, without further ado, here's the episode you've been waiting for. Alex, welcome to Reveal. We're so thrilled to have you on the show today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And I am so excited for our conversation, but just to set the stage a bit for all of our listeners, you're currently the AVP of Omni-channel sales at AT&T, so I'm thrilled to learn more about what that means. Sure. And you have a pretty big team of inside sellers, about 600 plus sellers on your team today. And your experience is quite unique. I was taking a look at your LinkedIn profile. You were a seller yourself. You had a stint in marketing. You kind of came back to inside sales. So tell us a little bit more about your take on inside sales versus outside sales.
Yeah, sure. I currently, as you mentioned, lead our inside sales practice for AT&T Business. And that's inclusive of inside sellers who face off to small business customers, medium-sized business customers, enterprise, public sector, and we've played around with a couple of varied models of inside sales within that. But my background had predominantly been in outside sales. And what's interesting is when I started in the sales arena, inside sales to me felt like this. If you didn't make it in sales, you somehow made your way to inside, and it was somewhat lesser of the two evils. And that was the probably preconceived notion I had throughout my career, and going in and trying a marketing role, as you mentioned. I was a chief of staff for a sales leader for a little while, and then did some operational roles, but always felt myself coming back to a sales role or in the arena of selling and supporting sellers and our customers. But now leading inside sales, it's almost like the pendulum has shifted for me personally, but I also think the market as well as the profession. And I think if you look back over the last, 2 years now, there was a time when all outside sellers were inside sellers because of the pandemic. The environments we were selling in now all shifted overnight. And I was already well on my way in inside sales to uncover the productivity advantage inside sellers had just because of the newer technology and data, readiness of data, and our ability to absorb and then take action as a result of it. That just wasn't the case when I was an outside seller, and looking at other types of sales professions differently than I do today. So I'd say now looking at inside sales, I just find it to be far more productive for a couple of reasons. I think when I look at the customers we sell to, not all of them are in the office any more than I am. And that the decision makers' makeup and profiles are different, whether that be generationally, whether that be the hats they wear. That used to be businesses that were predominantly in an office setting who are maybe now hybrid or perhaps even totally virtual, to where, knocking on someone's door, there wouldn't be someone on the other end who could actually tell you yes. So finding customers and decision makers digitally, virtually is what we're finding to become very productive. Not to say our outside sales team's not productive. I'm just more intellectually stimulated with the opportunity around looking at a seller resource and determining how to maximize that productivity of that resource. And so that's how we're playing around with new technology, new models, and comparing and contrasting, and always taking advantage of what's happening with our customer base, what's happening in our selling environments, and how do we maximize on all that.
For you personally, was it some of these trends that drove your decision to kind of join the inside sales and come to the other side of the house?
Yeah, I joined inside sales by taking over our college hire sales training organization that I actually came through and started the company with 11 years ago. So for me, it was a passion project of, I was a seller. I was a leader who hired graduates out of this program onto my sales team and had some perspective of, as a seller in the program, what were some missed opportunities? And as a manager hiring, what were some gaps in the individuals I was hiring that perhaps I could create and fill those voids when leading this program in its next chapter. And so the premise of the program was a development program. We did pretty mass hiring and onboarding, but it was by and large a training program first and a sales generation program second. And in fact, we sat in HR organizationally. We didn't even sit in the sales channel. And our leadership teams got together and said, now that we've got real good clarity on the mission of this program, let's think about how to make, again, when you put the productivity first, how do we create even more productive sellers? Well, perhaps we create less theoretical and more realistic scenarios for onboarding, like providing quotas day one, and sitting in a sales channel, going through prospecting, carrying not only a target, but also the act of transacting and all that comes with the process and the operational complexity of following through on a sale for day two and having customers stay with you. And all of that was really good practical experience that was transferable throughout the time after our sellers' time in this program. And so then we realized, after, let's call it a year or two into that kind of restructuring of becoming an heavy expense center to now a very unique revenue generating center, how do you then scale that? And it was an inside sales program. Even though we were training for outside sales, we were inside. And so then we started playing around with, okay, well, what if we never sent them outside? What happens if we create new roles where they just continue through in the very similar modality that they were onboarded and trained in? And next thing you know, we're scaling inside sales and creating vertical teams. We're creating digital teams that absorb and react to our digital leads. We are playing around with inside account management and customer success. All these things, I would say, are as a result of us rethinking what was a very unique program that's now, I would say, expanded into an inside sales practice.
Well, it's very cool to hear how you were in the program, then leading the program. Program had one outcome, now it has multiple. Very cool to hear, Alex. And you mentioned it now, and I believe also when we were prepping, you said, I'm going to say quote, but I'm probably paraphrasing here. It used to be more productive to knock on doors rather than leverage data, but that has completely changed. I think I know what you mean on the front half, but you mind explaining a little bit more about what you mean
Sure.
on leveraging data for productivity?
Yeah, so AT&T is a little unique in the portfolio that we sell to. Depending upon that portfolio, there's only a certain number of states, cities, municipalities that can actually procure our services. For example, there are 22 states where AT&T is the local exchange carrier, and we can provide fiber connectivity very easily, very rapidly, and it's predominantly more dense of a geo footprint versus, I'll use the example of Texas. We're very dense in Texas, not as dense in Arizona. And so even within the city of Dallas, for example, not every building is lit with AT&T fiber. We are expanding that footprint very rapidly. But I would say prior to the degree of data that I mentioned earlier that is readily accessible to sellers, our outside sellers truly would knock on doors and provide the value proposition of AT&T fiber. And not every customer was necessarily it wasn't available as readily as it is now. And we weren't as intentional and targeted with the customers they were knocking on those doors. Perhaps it was a satellite office that had no decentralized decision making. So the decision maker wasn't even in that satellite office. It could be that we, for example, were going after a certain product, but they were really better positioned for a different one. But we didn't know that because of where we were blindly sending sellers off to prospect within. Whereas now we have a lot more data at our fingertips to say, we know you are a certain type of business that requires high degree of bandwidth, whether that be in file share or video conferencing, and you are within our footprint and we have fiber in your building. And the value proposition is we can turn you on tomorrow, and it's really competitive, best ever pricing, and we know your business. And so that is a much different, more compelling value proposition to target a customer on that type of prospect versus, hey, you cover Los Angeles. We have fiber in parts of Los Angeles. May the force be with you. And I think that was a little, and this was, again, I'm dating myself 11 years ago when just in general, sales tooling, Salesforce, I think, was just a fun idea and was just becoming a cloud-based CRM. And we were a very heavy, AT&T is basically a conglomerate of multiple different companies we've purchased over the years. And with that comes multiple instances of CRMs and billers and contracting. And just the selling environment was very complex. And you fast forward to 2021, where now we are a customer of Salesforce, and we have centralized and streamlined our sales practices and processes and tooling that allows us to take that complexity off the seller, put more time in their day to actually prospect, and then better yet, leverage new sales tooling and enablement platforms so that they sell for them. And it's no longer cold calling, it's warm calling and even hot calling based upon the tooling that we've been able to implement in our ecosystems and arm for our sellers. So it's just, I would say there's a piece of it that's an industry component of professional selling in 2021 as compared to 2010. That just is the beautiful, that's that's so beautiful about technology and all the advancements we see every day. But it's also AT&T. We truly have adopted a innovative approach to empowering our sales team, probably that is far more advanced today than it was 10 years ago. It's a long-winded way to answer that very simple question.
That's okay. Short, as you know, in sales, short questions should get long answers. So I feel like I did my job there.
Implementing any kind of change at a complex organization like AT&T to drive impact and productivity is no small feat. It's no small decision. You're going to be impacting thousands of people and, strong laid foundations. So I'd love to understand how you build a culture of experimentation or testing to figure out new models, new technologies, new processes that will then, really impact your entire team.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it would be, I'd be remiss to say it's so easy to come up with a concept and roll it out off. I think there's close to 10,000 sellers across AT&T. What we've found to be really successful is intentionally creating a organization to act as an incubator and pilot new tools, new models, new methodologies of approaching customers and prospects, and perhaps even selling. I'd say, we and this team was almost, after we had some success in the training program with, we almost acted as if we were our own startup within AT&T, essentially, like starting from scratch. And we created our own instances of certain tools, and it allowed us for some great flexibility to try these things, fail fast, innovate rapidly, iterate as we saw fit. And that's probably the best advice I could give for any organization looking to create change, is create a intentional change agent organization that is supported and designed to test, pilot, trial, and then scale when it works. And that's what we did here. Is we've created new tool platforms within my team, and we tried it here first. For those that worked, we then slowly scaled, because when you start in a training environment that intakes 500 sellers a year that eventually matriculate out into the sales force at large, with them come the way in which they learned. And that was on tools and processes that the greater organization didn't have. And so as others learn about this really cool, new, sexy thing that makes them more productive, there becomes a pull than a push with the broader team that is, that we're looking or targeting to adopt the new methodology or practice. That worked really well. We kind of created this own demand even within our sales force by, not necessarily giving everyone everyone had access, but we didn't push it on them. It was only for those who asked for it. And then of course, those who were asking for it were using it, adopting it, and then they told their friend about it, who then wanted it. And then it became this, game of telephone and the next best thing, that eventually we created more broader scale, larger programs that became widely adopted faster.
Game of telephone at AT&T, no pun intended. Could not let that sit on the shelf.
Good, that was a good one.
But that is the best way that I've seen for sales people to pick up new technology, right? Is give it to a small group of folks and let them kind of, use it, like you said, and then it goes viral a little bit as people say, oh, you booked two more meetings than I did this week or today, or closed more deals than last month. How? And then, I've been using this new tool, and then now everybody wants it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm curious, Alex, as you're building, as you have this team you mentioned, and you're kind of building, towards productivity, I'm curious if you have any early indicators you look for in the, kind of pilot phase, right? So maybe let's just say, I don't know, maybe you're trying to increase meetings booked or pipeline generated, for example, and feel free to, come up with your own example. Do you have specific indicators or early indicators during that trial process, or you kind of focus just on that kind of big goal?
Yeah, I think you've got to break it up into, again, intentional outcomes and intentional tests. So if I'll use an example, we were trialing this digital team for we were outsourcing lead management for customers who indicated on our websites that they would like to speak to someone to talk more about an AT&T service that was being advertised or positioned online. And then it was where do we think, it was a relatively low cost resource that we were partnering with a vendor on. And we were looking across industry benchmarks and said, I don't know if we're getting our fair share of digital conversion. So let's test what it would take for us to improve that. And we stood up a team to then bifurcate the kind of A/B test certain traffic going to a vendor resource and certain traffic going to a different team. And it became really clear on what the KPIs were going to be. Is the traffic comparable? What's the conversion rate like? What's the order value? What's the average order value size? And just compare and contrast. I think similar with any tool you would, or platform or process, The reason why you're going to test it is because you are looking to achieve improvement in a certain area. And I think gaining clarity on the 1, 2, max 3 metrics you'll define as success of this evaluation is going to be paramount in order to determine, was the trial successful, and then can you then use those as benchmark metrics that you can reinforce the scale business case, because it's really easy to test, but when you start putting the numbers and figures around a broader sales force at large, it becomes it's a true investment, and you got to make sure that the outcomes you received on the front end are actually realized on the back.
Totally makes sense.
So speaking of data and having access to additional metrics and things that you can track, I think it's one thing for whoever's like running these pilot programs to have access to that, right? Like they have that mindset, we're going to be doing this A/B testing, et cetera. It's a totally another thing to put all this data in the hands of your sellers, in the hands of the frontline managers who may not be accustomed to this. So I'm curious, like maybe it's like a 2-part question, but like how are your sellers and frontline folks utilizing this data? And second is like, how do you really ensure that that they're data literate?
Yeah. Great questions. I'll use an example. I'll use 2 examples, and I was not paid to say this about the Gong platform. I'll start though with another tool, and I'll get to Gong and how we're leveraging it. We use a tool called Outreach. I'm sure most of your listeners are familiar with the platform. That was relatively new to AT&T. We'll call it 2 years ago. And for relative to how do we put data in the hands of the end user, I'd say prior to Outreach, our sellers were dependent upon our marketing organization to create leads on their behalf. Whereas now our sellers have the ability to create their own leads through various sequences that we put in their hands, and they can tweak and determine based on their reply rate, their hit rate, their ultimate conversion rate, which ones work for them and which ones don't, and then iterate accordingly. And so that just training on the value of that, those various metrics that come out of that platform is a new thing for us that made us feel more in control of our own destiny, but as well more capable in our prospecting efforts. From a management perspective, our managers had a really good way of always tracking quantity from our sellers, meaning how many calls were our sellers making, how many outreach tasks are overdue, the quant side of prospecting and we'll call it sales management. We have dashboards on dashboards to tell us every which thing to Sunday. But the quality component was really hard for us to measure. And that's where Gong has helped us through not only just the deal intelligence, but also on the mention rates. We know exactly what our campaigns are supposed to be providing for us. Are sellers actually mentioning the value proposition, keywords, buzzwords? Are they hitting the 5 things we need on every discovery call? Those are things we could not measure through how many calls they were making, like the quality component. And so I'd say that data that is super intuitive at the manager level to have at any given time, real time, in a one-on-one ad hoc, if they're at night scratching their head on why their numbers are not where they are, like they have the wherewithal to go dig in and investigate what could be improved. And so but all of that comes back to, we have an advantage within my team is they don't know any other way because they were trained at the onset with these platforms. For an organization with high tenure, embedded, these two tools coming in after the fact, you have to think about what was it that they were doing before that now is different and faster and better. And that takes time. Like you've got to, I think we've relaunched Gong like 3 times with our management community, because you come at it with one use case, you learn about what's working that even better, and you kind of relaunch it, and then you learn of more use cases, and you kind of do like a refresher. It's an iterative and repetitive process that over time, I think, and that's just it. I think the answer is time is when you truly get to your nirvana state.
It's great.
I would love to know if Alex, if you can share like where, and maybe it's high level, so we don't get flagged from comms, but like I'd love to know what you're focused on when it comes to next year and your team's productivity.
Yeah, I'm biased now on inside sales, so you can imagine I've always been all in, but now I'm, the intellectual stimulation I mentioned earlier. Like to me now, there's this endless art of the possible. So we are going to continue to look for new ways to organize inside sales. We're going to look for new ways to demonstrate value in different sales distribution models. And I would say 2022 is the year of more ideas, more innovation, more distribution, more tooling componentry. I think the technology side of this, we've just scratched the surface of our ability to be effective in prospecting with intuitive and insightful data. Now, when your sellers become data scientists, you're onto something. On them asking for more different dashboards reporting out of the various tools that we use because they want to refine their craft based on what they're seeing, like you've really unlocked something. And then, oh, by the way, if one person's asking for that, that means there's probably 10 others thinking about it, but for whatever reason aren't really just raising their hand. And so there's a scale opportunity there. So I think next year it's really, we're continuing to refine our vertical approach on creating specialized teams. Another beautiful thing about inside sales, you can react really quickly to market dynamics without being geographically dependent. And so as new trends and dynamics occur in our marketplace, we'll continue to respond really quickly with new, flexible teams that are designed to do just that. And so I think playing around with these models, and it truly is the target will always be moving and will never reach an end state, but it's continuing to learn with each iteration. That is probably what's the most exciting piece of this portion of our business right now.
Well, that definitely resonates, Alex. One of our operating principles at Gong is want more. So the year of more, that is a great one. You have a lot of things to accomplish. So hats off to you and your team.
Right.
Well, why don't we head into our final question?
Okay.
And would love to get your take on this, which is, how would you describe sales in one word?
Passion. I think
Love it.
I like it.
You 100% have to be passionate about not just what you sell, but who you're selling for. Passionate about the impact it has on the end user and also the passion for doing it, for getting up every day and again seeking that perfection of your craft and the overall opportunity. I think with short of passion, you're handicapped.
Amazing. Well, thank you from the entire Reveal team, Alex, for joining us today and talking about your team and some of the things that you're thinking about in regards to productivity. We'll catch you soon.
Thanks so
Alex.
much for having me. This was a blast.